Welcome to this explainer. Today, we are diving deep into the strangest, most perplexing corners of human history. We usually think of history as this neat, logical progression of events, right? Kings conquering lands, scientists making huge discoveries, empires rising and falling. But what happens when the human mind, or even entire societies, completely lose their grip on reality? Today, we're unpacking some of the most bizarre plagues, phantom wars, and chilling historical mysteries that will literally leave you speechless.
So, let's jump right in with a genuinely chilling question. Can a dance actually be deadly? I mean, it sounds like the plot of some dark, twisted fairy tale, but I want to take you to the bustling streets of Strasbourg, France. The year is 1518. It was a perfectly normal summer day until one woman stepped outside and just began to move. And the terrifying part? She didn't stop.
This event became known to history as the terrifying dancing plague. It all kicked off on day one with this single woman named Frau Troffea. She stepped right into the street and started dancing uncontrollably. And to be clear, this wasn't a celebration, it was a bizarre compulsion. Then, the true horror set in. Within a month, this urge spread like wildfire. Desperate authorities thought the cure was to literally ban music. Spoiler alert, that didn't work at all. People just kept dancing. For 2 agonizing months, this relentless, bone-tiring physical exertion completely gripped the city, before it just mysteriously stopped. 400. That's the sheer, staggering number of people who eventually joined Frau Troffea out there in the streets. I mean, just imagine the chaos of that for a second. 400 citizens, completely unable to control their own limbs, dancing non-stop day and night until their feet actually bled. And there was absolutely no known physical cause. It's the kind of number that really forces us to stop and ask, how on earth could something like this happen?
Well, modern historians and psychologists think the answer is mass hysteria. Since no biological cause was ever found for the dancing plague, it's classified today as a terrifying example of a psychological contagion. It's basically what happens when extreme stress or fear or deeply held beliefs cause the fragile human mind to just crack. It acts almost like a virus, allowing unexplainable, uncontrollable physical symptoms to spread incredibly fast through a population.
That brings us to Section 1, Epidemics of Contagious Hysteria. Now, history shows us that 1518 wasn't just some isolated incident of the human brain short-circuiting. These kinds of uncontrollable behaviors can spread across completely different centuries. Fast forward with me to 1962, to a girls' school in Tanganyika, which is modern-day Tanzania. Another incredibly chilling psychological contagion erupted here. It started with just a few students giggling. But this wasn't your average classroom giggle fit. It rapidly escalated into a full-blown laughter epidemic that spread completely out of control, jumping to nearby schools and even infecting surrounding villages.
It's absolutely fascinating when we put these two events side by side. On the one hand, you have the 1518 dancing plague, uncontrollable physical exertion going on for 2 solid months. On the other, the 1962 laughter epidemic, months of nonstop laughter that got so disruptive it actually forced entire school systems to completely shut down. Both of these incidents brilliantly illustrate how deeply a psychological contagion can disrupt society. They prove that sometimes laughter really isn't the best medicine. Sometimes it's a full-blown crisis.
All right, moving on to Section 2, Bizarre Justice in Trials. We've talked about the masses losing their minds, but what happens when the institutions themselves go off the rails? Like, what does a society do when its actual legal system loses its grip on reality? Just look at the real documented medieval defendants brought into court. Back in medieval Europe, justice was applied bizarrely universally. They treated animals as moral actors exactly like people. I'm not kidding. We have official records of pigs being formally tried and hanged. We have rats being officially excommunicated by the church for spreading the plague. They even dragged literal insects into court. It sounds like a cartoon, but this was the grim everyday reality of the medieval legal system. A reasonable fear of death. Get this, in 1510, a lawyer named Bartholomew Chasson was assigned to defend a group of rats. Yes, rats. They had apparently destroyed a local barley field. When his furry little clients obviously failed to show up in court, Chasson successfully delayed the trial. How? He argues that the rats couldn't attend because they had a reasonable fear of death from the local cats and dogs. And the crazy part? The judge completely accepted the argument and postponed the trial indefinitely.
As funny as that sounds, this institutional hysteria took a much darker turn a few centuries later. During the infamous Salem witch trials in 1692, the paranoia in the community ran so deep that even man's best friend wasn't safe. An actual dog was officially accused of witchcraft and executed. The townsfolk were completely hysterical, believing that animals could act as vessels for a witch's soul. In this specific case, they were convinced the dog was carrying the spirit of a man who had refused to arrest accused witches and was using the dog to curse local livestock.
Okay, if you thought putting a dog on trial was wild, medieval church politics took things to an entirely different level in 897 AD with the horrific Cadaver Synod. Here's how this went down. Step 1, Pope Stephen VI orders the corpse of his predecessor, Pope Formosus, to be dug up. Step 2, they literally dress this decaying dead body in full papal robes and prop it up in a chair. Step 3, they put the corpse on trial, naturally find it guilty, chop off its fingers, and dump it into the river. It's a truly breathtaking example of authority, completely untethered from sanity.
Let's transition to Section 3, Phantom Enemies and Illusions.
So let's pivot from the courtroom to the battlefield. What happens when heavily armed societies hallucinate or completely misunderstand who they're even fighting? Take the Austrian army hallucination. In the late 1700s, an Austrian army camp dissolved into absolute terrifying chaos. A group of soldiers got incredibly drunk on schnapps, started arguing, and in the confusion of the darkness, they literally hallucinated that an Ottoman attack was underway. They opened fire, they fought an entire deadly pitched battle against themselves, suffering severe casualties before they finally realized there was no enemy there at all.
It's really interesting to compare two actual documented wars fought over or even directly against animals. On one hand, you've got the 1932 Great Emu War. The Australian military literally deployed soldiers with machine guns to fight off massive flocks of crop-destroying emus. After a month of the birds scattering and completely outmaneuvering the troops, the military just gave up. The emus won. On the other hand, we have the Pig War. This was a massive geopolitical standoff between the US and the British Empire over a boundary dispute. What sparked it? A British pig ate an American farmer's potatoes. The only casualty in this entire global standoff? The pig.
Wars can be fought over phantom threats, for sure, but sometimes the real threats are so bizarre they seem completely made up. 634. According to Cuban intelligence, that is the staggering number of separate, highly bizarre assassination plots orchestrated against revolutionary leader Fidel Castro.
This kind of geopolitical paranoia birthed utterly absurd, almost cartoon villain tactics. I mean, we are talking about literal poison cigars. We're talking about intelligence agencies planting exploding seashells in locations where he liked to swim. They custom-made a toxic diving suit laced with dangerous fungi. The CIA even schemed to dust his shoes with thallium salts for the sole purpose of making his famous beard fall out, thinking it would somehow ruin his public image. You can't make this stuff up.
Castro himself totally recognized the absolute absurdity of these endless phantom plots. He once mocked his enemies with this great quote, saying, "If surviving assassination attempts were an Olympic sport, I'd win gold." It brilliantly hits the nail on the head, showing the utter futility of these wildly creative, heavily funded, yet entirely failed schemes.
Which brings us to our final section, our lost human history.
We've spent this whole explainer looking at detailed, completely bizarre accounts from the last few centuries. But we really need to put that timeline into perspective. Modern humans have been around for roughly 200,000 years. Yet our written, recorded history, it only covers about the last 6,000 of those years. Let's do the math there. That means a staggering 97% of our entire story as a species is simply lost to time. We are only working with a tiny 3% sliver of the whole picture.
Let that sink in for a second. 97% of our story is completely missing, aside from some scattered artifacts, a few old stone tools, and cave art that give us tiny little hints. The vast, overwhelming majority of the human experience is a total dark blank. We are talking about hundreds of thousands of years of human triumphs, tragedies, and daily lives that we will simply never, ever know.
And that leaves us with this final, provocative thought. Think back to everything we just covered today. We know about the terrifying 1518 dancing plague, we know about the horrific Cadaver Synod and the exploding seashells, but we only know about them because they happen to fall in that tiny 3% window of recorded time. So I have to ask you, if this much utter absurdity happened in just the last few centuries, what other bizarre plagues, phantom wars, and chilling mysteries are lost forever in the dark of that 97%? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer today. Stay curious and always keep questioning what you think you know.